Indie gaming is a fantastic thing. Back in the glory days of the 5th and 6th generation consoles, game development was cheap enough that developers could create unique and unusual games about, well, just about anything. From games about pirate ships, to games about being a mosquito, to games literally just about working in a Japanese multinational fast food chain. Since the PS3 era, game budgets have gotten more and more bloated. As a result, developers couldn't really take as many risks. Big companies weren't so happy with gambling their money on a game about a pink-haired boy getting frisky with pigs. These industry restrictions are actually what inspired many would-be developers to create their own independent games. As technology improved and became more ubiquitous, it got to the point where pretty much anyone could make a game with enough time. However, the line between indie and AAA has just got more and more blurry over the years. These days, it's basically impossible to effectively distinguish between the two. That hasn't stopped people from trying, however, so we're going to go through the normal expectations people may have for indie games and show you why they just don't work anymore. I'm Will with Cliqist, and today we're shattering some indie misconceptions. Small studios. Even to this very day, there are plenty of people out there that think of indie games as being made by at most two dudes tapping away on their keyboards in a basement somewhere. Don't get me wrong, that can still totally be the case. There are plenty of really great indie games out there developed by one or two man teams, like Cave Story or Super Meat Boy. But just as often as not, indie game teams can be made up of huge amounts of people. Hellblade had at least 20 people working on it, and Compulsion Games had got 40 by the time 2018 rolled around. The expectation that an indie game can only be developed by a small team is unhelpful and totally outdated. These days, an indie development team can be anything from one person carefully crafting pixelated anime characters to 50 people working with so many polygons that their eyes turn inside out. Small budgets. Another common expectation for indies is they all work on a shoestring budget, entirely funded by the developer's day job at the local McDonald's. Well, once again, this can certainly still be the case. Axiom Verge, for instance, was developed by Tom Happ over a 5-year period while he worked a regular job, technically making the budget $0. There are still plenty of indie games out there that have huge budgets. Star Citizen is technically an indie game, and not only is it the highest funded video game to ever be crowdfunded, but it's actually the 4th highest funded crowdfunding project of all time overall. So far, it's actually raised over $200 million of funding from different crowdfunding sources, not to mention the nearly $50 million in funding that it's gotten from private sources. Ugh, saying that makes me feel dirty. Regardless, it should be pretty easy to see that in the days of crowdfunding, indie games can have anything from $500 to $500 million. Or at least they might be able to if people keep giving Star Citizen money. Stop it. Niche appeal. Niche is an interesting factor for indie games. Genres that were long considered dead by AAA standards, such as adventure games and survival horror, were seemingly revived by the indie market. In fact, it's a common misconception that the industry is mostly made up of only super weird niche games that don't appeal to the mass market. Once again, this expectation for indie games to appeal to a niche market is pretty outdated these days. Take a look at Rocket League. It was developed and published by Psyonix, and it has become one of the most insanely popular and successful games of all time, with over 5 million downloads in less than a month. Another great, if slightly insanely difficult example of this would be Cuphead, an indie game which sold over 1 million copies worldwide in less than a week. Makes you wonder if the brothers Moldenhauer made a deal with the devil. Ha. Obviously, at this point, it's plain to see that niche appeal means nothing to indie games. In the days of mass digital distribution, an indie title can release and be insanely popular in days, if not minutes. Mass popularity is no longer the remit of AAA alone. Publishers. Having a publisher should really be the only disqualification for being an indie game, surely. I mean, indie literally stands for independent after all. It's in the bloody name, right? Well, once again, this may once have been true, but things are a little different in the monstrous, sprawling mass that is the modern games industry. There are publishers out there, such as TinyBuild for instance, that go out of their way to publish games for indie studios. These guys give access to better marketing, storefronts, and established social media presences to independent developers, who normally wouldn't be able to get near those sort of things. Obviously, suddenly getting more attention for the game on Twitter doesn't really stop a game being indie. Again, the modern era has made this expectation obsolete. Traditional style publishing is now only a single string to the bow of the modern game industry. These days, having an established website, enough money in your account to cover Steam's fees, and a decent amount of followers on Twitter is enough for you to become a game publisher. Well, I like to think that I concisely destroyed some pre-existing notions of what makes a game indie. Honestly, in this day and age, the state of gaming, both indie and otherwise, is so rapidly changing that trying to hang on to any sort of expectation of what you might get from an indie game is a pretty futile exercise. Indie gaming is so vast and multifaceted that it's pretty much down to you to figure out which games are or aren't indie for yourself. At the end of the day, you'll probably find someone who disagrees with you. Because, welcome to the internet. Thanks for watching. Did you agree with my post-mortem of these indie expectations? If not, what do you expect from an indie game in the modern era? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like and share the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe for more. Also, you can feel free to check out my channel too if you like. Please, I'm so lonely there.